The PS4 is coming back. Why is the PS5 losing this important feature? And is the next PS5 accessory imminent? How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the midweek news update. In this week's video, I've got a ton of awesome news to talk about. As far as games go, I've been playing the hell out of Diablo 4 still. It's like taken over my entire life. I started a seasonal character finally, and yeah, I'm playing as a necromancer and it's awesome. I was gonna do the classic bone spear build, but like, I don't know. I wanna just mess around with it and try and make my own build and see if that's viable. I don't really know if that's gonna work out too well after the last patch, but 1.1.1 I think is the version number, goes live very soon. So yeah, we'll see. I'm having fun with it still, but I don't know. There's a lot of games out that I really want to get into, like Remnant 2. So I'm having fun for now, but I want to play some other stuff besides the live service. All right, so the first news story I have for you guys today is absolutely just like defeating. So I just did a video where I said the PS4 is finally dead. It's going away. We're finally going to start getting a bunch of exclusive games for the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. Sony has moved on. All the other publishers will also move on as well. Everything will be great and we'll finally get started on the next gen. And I'm telling you right now, the game that I'm about to tell you that is coming to PS4 and Xbox One is a game that I genuinely do not know how they are going to get it running on those last gen consoles. You probably already know what the game is, and it's Jedi Survivor. EA just had their earnings call and mixed in with all that boring stuff like, oh, our sales are up 21% year over year thanks to Jedi Survivor. They also had a line that said, thanks to the strength of this legendary franchise and community demand, our development team has committed to bringing this Jedi experience to PS4 and Xbox One. I just like don't know anymore, right? Like, out of all the games that you could pick that are next gen only, like Dead Space, another EA game that runs really well and is pretty well optimized after a few patches, or you could do something like even Returnal or Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart now that we've seen it running off of a micro SD card, or any of these games that are next gen but don't really push the hardware all that much. The game that is getting backported to the PlayStation 4 is the most demanding game that has been released this generation. So I have the misfortune of having bought this game twice. I have it on PS5. I was not happy with the 30 FPS mode or the performance mode, which really isn't a performance mode at all. At launch, I'm talking about. It's gotten about 5 or 6 patches since it came out, and the 30 FPS mode is pretty good at this point. But I also had the morbid curiosity of how it would run on my PC, so I picked it up on Green Man Gaming, and it's just like a trade-off situation no matter what. Like, I can get a pretty locked 60 FPS on my PC, but FSR looks like crap on PC, whereas on the PS5, whatever version of it they're using actually looks pretty good. And I ended up just settling for the hard locked 30 FPS, but I just like wouldn't say this game really looks that visually incredible. Like, when you're playing Final Fantasy 16, right? You're getting into the icon fights, you're exploring these big open maps, there's tons of particle effects, there's crazy lighting. Some of the lighting looks ray traced. I don't really know if it is or not, but when you're in some of these forest environments, they look almost photorealistic, and you can kind of see why that game is struggling to run on the PlayStation 5, right? Like, it's not really great that it's running as poorly as it does, but at least in the 30 FPS mode, it holds a consistent 30 FPS, and the story is good enough to kind of make up for that. Whereas Jedi Survivor, that game is not really doing anything graphically, I would say, that makes me go, wow, this really looks like it's taxing the console. It's basically all linear corridors that are all the same color because it's using FSR. The textures aren't anything crazy like that. Cal's hair looks really weird in certain lighting, and just like the faces look a little bit low res no matter where you play it. And I just don't really see the reason for this game running as poorly as it does, outside of the fact, of course, that they just rushed it out the door. And then we heard this news after just a few patches that they were going to get started on the third game, and now they also have the whole Battlefield franchise being worked on at Respawn. They also have like an RTS in the Star Wars universe, a first-person shooter, and now they're working on backporting this game to the PlayStation 4. It seems like Respawn is getting spread very thin, mainly because they're the only competent studio at EA. Except Motive, of course, who worked on Dead Space and Star Wars Squadrons, and I'm pretty sure they're working on an Iron Man game now. But, you know, the shooter studio that made Titanfall, Respawn, the people behind Apex Legends, they're the people who are getting all of the shine at EA. And I just wish they could have either a bigger team or more time to work on these games. Because when it comes to EA and their single player stuff lately, they're making really good games. Like, the core of what they're making is awesome. It just sucks that we have to wait months and months and months to get a consistent experience out of these games. And looking at the performance of the first game in this series, Jedi Fallen Order, I played that game on my PlayStation 4 Pro, and whether you use the performance mode or the quality mode, it did not run well at all. The frame times were crazy. The performance mode was like at best a 35 or 40 FPS experience. That game still has major loading stutters and pop-ins. So thinking about that, and then the visual upgrade and technological upgrade that they did on this game's sequel, I just genuinely can't figure out how they're going to be able to get this running on the PlayStation 4, because the PlayStation 4 doesn't even support FSR, which is something that the PS5 needs to run this game in the first place. It's just getting ridiculous at this point that we're almost 3 years into the life cycle of this console, and the list of exclusive PS5 games that are actually exclusive to the PlayStation 5 and not on the Xbox One, not on the PlayStation 4. It feels like for every one game that gets added to that list, about 2 or 3 get taken off from month to month, and I genuinely don't understand why, when last week we just had a news story where the PS5 has hit 40 million sales. It's doing absolutely incredible out in the wild there, and it's really gonna end up holding back gaming, right? Like, the only reason I can think of as to why they think they can get this game running on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One is the Series S. That console is like a beefed up Xbox One X. It's pretty close to a last gen console, and it is holding up Baldur's Gate 3 on Xbox because it's hard to get the split screen co-op working on the Series S version of that game, and Microsoft is saying tough, figure it out. But knowing that that console is pretty close to an Xbox One X and Jedi Survivor came out and runs on the Xbox Series S, I'm sure EA's higher ups are sitting there saying, well, we got it running on that console, why can't we just get it running on the Xbox One and Xbox One X? So yeah, if for some reason you have a PS4 and you've been waiting to play this game and you're like, oh, I've been saving up for a PlayStation 5 and then I can finally play Jedi Survivor with all the patches that are going to come out for it, but now I'm going to be able to play it on PlayStation 4 and all you have is a base PS4, even a PS4 Pro, I would not play this game on last gen consoles. I know that they did wonders with Hogwarts Legacy, they only had to pare it back just a little bit. I just personally don't see how a game that doesn't run very well on the PlayStation 5 is going to run very well on the PS4. But hey, I might be wrong. I might be looking back in a few months saying, wow, it runs better on the PS4 than it does on the PS5, and then I'll be mad at Respawn saying, why is that the case? But yeah, I really hope this generation really gets rolling sooner rather than later. At least Sony has finally started to give up on the PlayStation 4. Spider-Man 2 is a next-gen only experience, and it really looks like it, and I'm assuming and hoping that pretty much every exclusive Sony puts out over the next year or so really drives home the fact that we're done with the PlayStation 4 and it's time to focus on the PlayStation 5. Next up here, we got to talk about the PS5 Slim once again, because there's some new details here that, depending on how you look at them, either make it look like a better console or a worse one. So leading up to the original launch of the PlayStation 5, one feature that they marketed a lot was liquid cooling with this console. They were like, this thing's going to be running hot because it's going to be playing games at higher resolutions and higher frame rates, and it's really going to need that awesome liquid cooling underneath that amazing heatsink we've built into the console. And ever since it came out, it's really pared down the size of the heatsink, but that liquid cooling has remained. And the reason they've been able to kind of shrink the heatsink by about 20% each time they revise this console is that it cools itself really well, and the chip that they're putting inside of it runs more efficiently as time goes on. It's a really similar situation to the Nintendo Switch, because there was a hardware level hack with the original console that allegedly Nintendo couldn't fix. They went back to the drawing board and just made a more efficient Nintendo Switch that fixed the motherboard issue that allowed the console to be hacked. And because of that, we got better battery life and it ran cooler and more efficiently. That's what we've been seeing with the PlayStation 5 as time has gone on. They've shrunk the heatsink because it runs more efficiently with the new chip that they're putting inside of it. And if this rumor is to be believed, it seems like they've gotten things figured out to the point where they can kind of ditch the liquid cooling. And I just really don't know how I feel about this, because the more cooling you take out of a PlayStation console, the more worried I get, because going all the way back to the PS3, the biggest issue these consoles have had is cooling, right? Like, everyone knows the meme with the PS4 and PS4 Pro where when you turn it on, it sounds like the jets take taking off of the aircraft carrier at the beginning of Top Gun, right? Like I had a PS4 like that, and even after I cleaned all the dust out of the fan, it still was pretty loud all the way up to the end of the life cycle of the PlayStation 4. And my PS3, the launch one that I had that lasted a really long time, right when I hit the credits in Uncharted 3, the game crashed and it sent me to the dashboard, and then I put the disc in and it just didn't come up on the dashboard. And it turned out that my Blu-ray laser kind of burnt out because the console was overheating from playing so much Uncharted 3. And now we're at the point with the PlayStation 5 where they feel it's running efficiently enough, the cooling is working well enough where they can get rid of one of the marquee features, which is the main thing really keeping this console cool outside of the heatsink and the massive fan inside of it. And you also have to consider that they're going to allegedly shrink the size of the console at least a little bit, which means there's going to be less room for the big fan that they have in it. The heatsink is going to be smaller because that's been shrunk over the past couple of years or so, and now they're getting rid of the liquid cooling. So I'm just a little bit worried that the overheating issues we've seen with older PlayStation consoles will come back with this PS5 Slim. And I know there was that news story where that website said that like people were returning PS5s to be refurbished, and a lot of them were coming back with the APU kind of opened a little bit just from being jostled around, and because of that the liquid metal was able to escape the APU. Of course that ended up being BS, but we do have some evidence that the current PS5 is overheating a little bit thanks to Final Fantasy 16, which is a worrying sign because that's really one of the first and only games to really push the console to its limits outside of Jedi Survivor. You would get to a certain point in the game, a ton of people wrote in that they were having this issue. I even got a couple Facebook messages about it from people saying that yeah, they were having a problem when you would hit this cutscene, the game would crash, or sometimes the console itself would restart. So if the current PS5 with liquid metal cooling is already overheating, then what's going to happen if this PS5 Slim doesn't have liquid metal cooling? This is definitely something that I think hardware reviewers are going to have to take a look at, because you know, it sucks to lose features that are genuinely helpful. Even if they are overkill for the console that we have, it doesn't seem fair to remove them just because they are working too well, you know? Next up on my news list here, we've been hearing tons of rumors about a new PS5 showcase, a new announcement of the PS5 Slim coming in September, and now we're getting even more evidence that this is going to happen through a new patent leak about the PS5 earbuds that Jim Ryan announced at the last showcase. So I'm actually excited for these earbuds for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Razer Hammerhead Hyperspeed, whatever they're called for PlayStation, they are really good. They sound pretty decent, they fit well in your ears, and they also, in addition to having Bluetooth to connect to your phone, come along with a dongle that makes it so you get zero latency when you have them plugged into your PlayStation 5. So I was hoping that when these gaming earbuds were announced by Sony, knowing that I think the PS5 doesn't have accessible Bluetooth, Sony would figure out a way to make a dongle for these earbuds that make them have also no latency, just like those Razer Hammerhead Hyperspeeds. And thanks to a patent which reveals a lot about the design of these earbuds, it looks like they are going to come along with a dongle for the PlayStation 5, which you know is great. So this patent unfortunately doesn't tell us whether or not these headphones are going to have Bluetooth. I'm just going to go ahead and assume they would, because it feels like a little too anti-consumer to make them only work with a dongle. And the Project Q is coming out soon, so while yeah, the earbuds would be awesome for the PlayStation 5, I love using earbuds on a handheld, so it would be kind of crazy to have to use a dongle with them to play on a handheld device. I mean, it can be done. The Razer one is pretty small and it works fine on the Steam Deck, but overall, I just prefer Bluetooth when I could use it without latency over using a dongle. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of earbuds. I also really like gaming earbuds, so I'm gonna pre-order these as soon as they become available. I feel like it's gonna be a situation similar to the DualSense Edge, where there's way more of them available than people actually want, because I'm just thinking these things are gonna be pretty expensive. Because if you look at the price of the 1000X M4s, they're pretty expensive. They're close to 200 bucks, and Sony also with their PlayStation branded stuff likes to mark things up, right? Like they're not passing off any savings to us just to get these things into people's hands. So I'm assuming these things are gonna be $150 at least. So I think they're gonna be pretty widely available as a premium product. And the last news story I have for you guys today is one that's like kind of a little surprising, but the more I think about it, not really. So Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart just came out on PC, and by all accounts, it's an incredible port, right? Like we talked about the whole controversy with HDDs and SSDs and SD cards. This game, long story short, runs really well off of a micro SD card on the Steam Deck, and also can theoretically run off of an HDD on a PC. And people are saying, oh, Sony lied about the marketing with the SSD and everything like that. And I just like really don't think so, because you know, you could get it running on an HDD, right? Like we saw that happening, but when you run it on a slower drive, you get much longer loading, and that kind of takes away from some of the coolest parts of the game. So do you need the SSD to run it? No. Should you have one? Yes. I think that is the fairest way to look at this. But for how many people were talking about this game, I just assumed it was doing well on Steam, but it turns out that it was yet another flop flop from Sony, just like Returnal, which is kind of crazy, but not really that surprising, like I said at the beginning of this story. So on Steam, you can go to this website called Steam Charts and put in any game and see how many people are playing it concurrently at any given time. So the best time to figure out how many people bought a game is on launch day, because the concurrence will generally speaking line up with roughly the amount of people who picked up the game. And this game peaked at around 8,300 people, which is not good. And despite the fact that this is a sequel to a reboot that came out a few years ago, I don't think PC players are really all that interested in it, because, you know, if they've been playing on PC their whole life, they don't know what Ratchet & Clank is, and Sony doesn't market a lot of their PC games as much as they do when they're coming out on PS5. You have Final Fantasy 16, and also on PC, Baldur's Gate 3 is about to come out, so you can kind of see why maybe a full price game that's over a year old isn't really gonna light the sales charts on fire. I would expect this game to do better over time, especially when Steam sales start happening. I don't really think it's the hugest deal that it's not selling well on PC, because Sony already put this game on PS Plus Extra. They made their money on PS5, and it was a launch window game to sell PS5s, and I would argue that it did just that. Anyway guys, that's all I've got for you in this midweek update. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.